So, welcome everyone on this Halloween. This particular lesson is going to just kind of build on some of the concepts that were presented to us before by Abraham. Abraham has been obviously taking the lead in all of the lessons up to this point in Conchas y Café. And for those of you who are joining in on the live streams, you can always get caught up on our YouTube channel where we have all of the past lessons for this current fall semester series available to view. And for everybody that is fully enrolled through Google Classroom, obviously you can download the handouts that accompany those videos too. For tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about Dadaism and, it's kind of like history, which I think in some ways is appropriate given the current history that we're living across the world. But as usual, we like to get started with our quote of the day. And today's quote, as you can see here, comes from actually one of the founders of Dadaism. Uno de los fundadores del dadaísmo se llama Tristan Tzara. Nació el 28 de abril del año 1896 y falleció el 25 de diciembre en el año 1963. Fue un poeta, ensayista y artista vanguardista rumano. As a Romanian avant-garde poet, he not only was kind of in the avant-garde literary scene, he was also active as a journalist, playwright, literary and art critic, composer, and film director. But again, Tristan Tzara, who is providing our quote for today, is one of the founders, considered to be one of the founders, I should say, of the Dada movement. And as you can see here, the quote reads, "Thought is made in the mouth." So it's an interesting quote for sure. I'm going to put it here in our chat as well, so that way we can have it available. Y en español se los traducí y dice, "El pensamiento se hace en la boca." So what does this quote say to you? How do you interpret this quote from Tristan Tzara? Feel free.
Well,
Yeah.
oh,
No, go ahead, Ms. Lois.
if I understand correctly, did
Mhm.
you say a thought is put in the mouth or from the mouth?
Thought is made in the mouth.
And that's true. Because if I speak something to you, and I didn't mean for that to rhyme, it gives you a thought, even though it's different than what I might have wanted to have you think.
Mhm.
My granddaughter used to say, and I was when I was reading the outline, the handout rather, I was gonna put that down as a statement because he was a hustler. He had a truck drive. What do you call that thing? That to pick up the cars, a tow truck. And he
Okay.
had the radio thing for the police when they have wrecks or something.
Mhm.
And he would rush over there, you know. And sometimes he would beat the another one. You know, it was like a I don't know a fight, but not physically, but a rush to get to the job. And so I says, "Where's your daddy?" She says, "He's out trying to make $1 out of 15 cents." That was kind of backwards, but that puts it into your mind that he's either a gambler, a hustler, or a man out trying to make means.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I didn't know if that would be one.
I mean, that is an interpretation if that's how you take what this quote is saying. It could be that it is kind of a way to describe a person that hustles. That's a possibility. We also have San Juanita, who in the chat wrote, "It sounds like how we say it is actually. It sounds like how we say it is actually what we really think." Um,
Excuse me, can I just say a little bit more about that?
yeah, go ahead.
It's when I read thought is made in the mouth. So if we were to really say what we actually think,
Mm-hmm.
we say it without thinking. It's
Mm-hmm.
when we have to think about it that we start changing things, I don't know if you know what I'm saying. You know what?
Yeah.
So
No,
in
that
other
makes
words,
sense. Yeah.
whatever I say, if I say it like just without thinking, that's really what I'm thinking, That's really what I mean.
Right, right.
And a lot of the time, people say, be careful what you say, think about what you say, like if it's not nice,
Oh,
if it's not nice, don't say it. But really, if it's not nice, it's because that's what you really mean to say. I think that's
if I say something like, "Oh, he's a poop butt," I mean, what did you say? Oh, nothing, nothing. He's a nice guy, when you get to know him. Yeah. So now I understand. Thank you for that clarification.
I don't think I've ever heard you say anything like that before, Miss Lewis.
I haven't, but
Sorry.
I haven't always been saying.
Ms. Lewis, I didn't hear it. Can you repeat?
Oh, all right, Brother Lewis, a poop butt.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
Okay.
That's not very nice, but it's not exactly the words that it could have been, But
yeah,
sometimes, I'm going to take that back. That has nothing to be with or with. I mean, to do with or not with of being a Christian. There's sometimes you're caught off guard,
Mhm.
and you just. Well, to me, being a Christian is being mindful of how you treat people,
Mhm.
how you respond to personal things that people might say to you, or being kind, So there's a different, people put too much emphasis on, oh, I'm a Christian, she's a Christian, you can't do this, you can't do that. I don't believe in that mess. And sometimes I do step out of the box, but it's nothing that would hurt anybody. So we have to face reality. Like, things are crazy. And you don't mean crazy, lunatic crazy, but things are so unpredictable, unexpected, challengeable. I mean, we have somebody up there that's, I mean, he's I could say he lost it. And you're gonna say he lost what? I mean, just look at his performance. I mean, he's out of it. So yeah, you have to face reality in certain things.
Mhm. Right, right, yeah. And I think that, it is maybe more along the lines of what San Juanita was saying, in the sense of like oftentimes the first reaction is probably the most raw and in some ways even correct reaction to certain things. Therefore, it's possible that the idea of thought being made in the mouth could be just speaking to that sense of like instinctual reaction. So,
Observation, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Abraham has been patiently waiting to add his 2 cents. Go ahead, Abraham.
I had to stop eating my bread. So this reminds me of a study done where they were thinking there's a couple of different people, that's people who actually think, like they have a conversation in their head, like,
Mhm.
oh, I should do this or I should do that. But there's some people who apparently don't have that kind of dialogue in their head. So that made me think of that. And also that by listening to ourselves talk, we sometimes to become aware of things we missed.
Mhm.
That's why it's good to practice poetry out loud, because that gives us a different feeling than what our thoughts are doing, because it's physical.
Mhm. Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about hearing work and hearing words actually performed in a way. It helps us process in a way that's different from our internal monologue, which some people have, some people might not have in the same way. In the chat, we also had a comment from Julie saying, thinking and talking go hand in hand. We have to talk a lot to understand people, things, and ideas. And then let's see what else. We also have a comment from Mojde in the chat saying, what matters is how our thoughts are worded. when it comes out of our mouths, right? So it's about careful construction of what we're saying. And then Eric added, thought expression comes verbally for most people, and the vehicle is the mouth.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. So, any other thoughts? Anyone else wants to add anything to this particular quote and your interpretation of it? Abraham says, "Did I say what I mean?" That is always a good question to ask ourselves. So, to give a little bit of background, a little bit of history on what Dadaism is, we're going to cover a little bit of the history. But one of the things that I do want to say about this particular quote is that it can sound kind of absurd, right? The construction or the idea that thought is actually produced in our mouth, um, is not something that we all kind of believe in, on the surface. Most of us are going to say, well, thoughts happen in our head, right? In our brain, in our mind. That's probably what the majority of people would say. However, Tristan Tzara, as one of the people who basically founded this movement of absurdist art, there was much more to this simple quote that we see here. So, pero hay que estudiar un poco sobre la historia del dadaísmo. Dada. And a little note on the name Dada. In some languages, it does mean yes, yes. In other languages, it supposedly means other things, such as father, a type of toy. Really, it has no specific meaning, according to the Dadaists. They wanted to produce a word or create a word for their movement that had a multifunctional ability to it. So that's where the word Dadaist or Dada comes from. But as you can see here, Dadaism is an artistic movement from the early 20th century. So that means the early 1900s. And it predates Surrealism. It's actually one of the things that helped inspire Surrealism. And it also helped inspire things like pop art from the 60s and 70s, all the way through to the 80s. And it really has had a big impact on art today, not just visual art, but especially literary art through things like magical realism, and other forms of literary art that we still see today. But the most important thing to remember is that this really came in response to the horrors of World War One. La Primera Guerra Mundial fue una de las guerras sin precedente. It was the first World War to really shock people into something that they had never really experienced before. Dadaism, or the Dada movement, as you can see here, rejected reason, rationality, and the order of the emerging capitalist society, and it instead favored chaos, nonsense, and anti-bourgeois sentiment. The idea of the bourgeois is really the idea of an upper middle class or an upper class. So this was kind of against really people who had money, in a time where the income inequality was very, very high. Dada art is often characterized by humor and whimsy, as you see here, and it tends towards the absurd. This piece of artwork that you see here, it's called Fountain or Fuente in Español, y viene de Marcel Duchamp. This was exhibited in the year 1917, and if you look at it, you might recognize it. It's exactly what you think it is. It's a urinal. It's a mass-produced urinal
Oh, yeah.
that has obviously a little signature on it. But this was actually put on display in a gallery setting, and Marcel Duchamp actually called it artwork. And that was a perfect example of what the Dadaist movement tried to speak to, right? The sort of capitalization, the modernization of the world, and what in a lot of European circles of art, it was kind of going against what people thought of as art at the time. Dadaism uses satire a lot, and it's usually critiquing the societal and political systems of the time. Again, this was really about critiquing the things that resulted in World War One, things like capitalism, things like colonialism, and other movements in the world that were trying to rationalize the human experience. And of course, World War One was the very first time in human history that there was urban combat and weapons of mass destruction and also civilian casualties. And it was also the same time period in which photography and film were much more accessible and therefore able to capture these things and disseminate them across the world. Before this time period in human history, it was not that common for there to be war reports, not that common for there to be, mass media actually sharing images of frontline battles. So that's something to really keep in mind. The common person was finally being exposed to things that they normally would only hear about or read about. Now they could visually see the impact of war and the atrocities of war. Así que el dadaísmo de plano fue un movimiento artístico que fue básicamente una reacción a lo chocante que es la vida real. Magical realism, is one of the literary movements that is kind of an offshoot of Dadaism. But Dadaism, again, is one of those things that takes what is real and tries to sort of flip it on its head so that it becomes as absurd as possible. Any questions so far? No? All right. So as Dadaism continued, it didn't last very long, but it did produce a lot of different kinds of artwork. This particular piece that you see here on the screen is called Cut with the Kitchen Knife Dada Through the Last Weimar Beer Belly Cultural Epoch of Germany. It's a super long title. Se los intenté a traducir. La traducción del título de la obra de arte es Cortado con el cuchillo de la cocina dada durante la última época barrigona cultural Weimar de Alemania. And this comes from Hannah Hoch. Hannah Hoch was one of the very few women artists that actually was gaining recognition in the art world. It was obviously still a very patriarchal time period, so more male artists were given platforms. However, Dada and the Dada movement was one of the times in art where there started to become a shift in representation of women in the arts world. Not enough, obviously, but it was still an opportunity for women to be political in their artwork. And it was an opportunity for people's expectations to be challenged. As you can see here in this artwork, it used a lot of collage to tell a story. And it ultimately is using elements of like political posters and that kind of thing to really just challenge our notions of what a political structure could be or what is making humans kind of go crazy for the time period. So again, the idea of Dadaism really was that they were declaring war against war and they were countering the absurd reality of the time period with their own kind of absurdity, with their own kind of nonsense. And they were really embracing the ideas of chaos as kind of a way to escape from the harshness and the horrors of war. And again, for those that maybe aren't familiar, the idea of satire is a more literary concept. So, satire, to give you the proper definition, it's a literary work holding up human vices and follies to ridicule or scorn. La sátira fue una de las herramientas que usaban durante el tiempo del Dada, del movimiento Dada. Y para mejor entender lo que es sátira, aquí les presento la definición. Sátira típicamente es una obra literaria criticando a los vicios y las locuras humanas a través de la burla y el desdén. So, satire is going to be a very key element of, the things that we would normally attribute to Dadaism. So the question that I have for you here is, how do you define absurdity? Thinking about 100 years ago during the First World War, right? That was in the 1920s. We are currently in the 2020s, almost 100 years exactly now. What do you define as absurd? We're living a very similar time period, which is,
Are you
not just
saying,
what's that? What was that, Miss Lois?
oh, what I've seen, oh, am I okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I'm just trying to get clarity, um, in comparison to back then. I remember I was told about it, and I've seen pictures about it, where
Mhm.
the women couldn't wear bathing suits and they had to wear things that looked like underwear, ruffles and stuff. Would that be something that was absurd at that time? Absurd, what do you call it? Ridiculous at that time?
Yeah, yeah. I
Or
mean, if
the
that's
women's
something that,
yeah, the women's suffrage thing
Mhm,
going on.
mhm,
Okay. And
yeah,
then I think about today with the men, there was a time even in our, well, I guess you would call it 20th century, where men didn't wear bright colors, and then all of a sudden they have rollers in their hair, red, pink, all those colors on that they didn't have
mhm,
before. And they had, that's when they first started wearing braids, and it was new.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so like keep those things in mind. Maybe even make a note of them, right? They were back then for the time period, it would have been suffragists, the women's right to vote was something that was very important politically speaking. And the absurd part about it maybe is that, women weren't treated as equals as men. So that is absurd. It's still a thing that's happening today, obviously, but
Yeah.
that is something that you could definitely note down.
I think that's when the women first started working because the
Mhm.
war going on, they needed somebody to work in the factories. Was
Yeah,
that
that's I think a little bit more in World
World War
War
II?
II.
Yeah,
We're thinking of World War One, but yeah, I mean your point
yeah.
is still, I think, very valid.
Okay, we'll leave
So
that out.
yeah, and then in the chat we also have Abraham added politics, economics, religion, you name it. Eric added Meta and TikTok Shorts as something that's absurd today. We have a hand raise from Julie and then a hand raise from Elena. First Julie and then Elena.
And the normalization of hate,
Mhm.
that to me is the biggest thing that's happening right now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I think, almost as human as, family. Like, I feel like it's very unfortunate, but that is absolutely true. That is something that we are for sure seeing in this current time period.
Yeah, I wonder if it's like our DNA or it's really triggered by societal influences. So that's, a thing that I'm grappling with right now
Yeah.
because of all this war going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I had an answer for that, but as somebody who has definitely studied history a lot and really sees the continuous nature of it, I have seen in the various classes that we've taught, Abraham and I, that yeah, hate for each other is one of those things that really does continue on, and in some cases it could be something that we could say is inherent in being human. But I think
Mhm.
in other cases we could say that it's something that is uh, nurtured from exterior forces. So it's a very complex thing for sure. But thank you for sharing that, Julie. Elena, you had your hand up, and then we have a hand up from San Juan.
Yeah. So sorry. Uh. Okay. So my question is, did I miss part of it? Because I came kind of late. I was late for class today.
Yeah, that's okay, Elena. Thank you for joining us today, though.
And how was your birthday on Sunday? on Sunday, if I don't mind asking you.
My birthday was good. Thank you for asking. Right now,
Oh,
we're
happy
gonna
birthday.
continue with the
And
lesson.
yes, my mom ordered my shakies on Sunday for
Oh,
takeout for order delivery. It was great,
oh, I'm glad you enjoyed
and
it.
I
I
had
hope
a
you enjoyed it.
pretend party.
Nice, nice. All right. Well, thank you, Elena. Thank you for joining us today. So if you have any questions, you can always put it in the chat too. And remember that this is being recorded. So if you do feel like watching it later, you can watch it later. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Um, and yes, thank you for the birthday wishes. San Juanita.
Yeah, happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
So, what I find absurd nowadays
Mhm.
is that in order for, I'm talking about like minority groups, how, we are supposed to be embracing and accepting and then express its freedom of expression and all that. But I've also noticed that sometimes I cannot say certain things about me for fear to upset somebody or for fear of what other people will tell me. That, I don't know if you understand where I'm coming from. For example, let me give you an example. I believe in God. I believe strongly in God.
Mhm.
Uh, and for some reason, I sense that I have to be careful with what I say because a lot of people are not very accepting of certain ideas.
Mhm.
And right away, they say, oh, we're not talking about religion. And I'm over here like, who's talking about religion?
Mhm.
So I find that very absurd that I cannot express myself because if I do, other people around me feel offended.
Mhm.
And so what do? I don't say anything and I keep it all to myself. I feel, honestly, I have felt like that in a lot of the classes that I've taken online
Mhm.
in the poetry classes.
Mhm.
You have to be careful what you say because whatever you say, somebody around you can be offended.
Mhm.
And so, trying to keep the peace,
Yeah.
I I limit myself. I set limits.
Mhm.
Honestly, and of course, then for some reason, I feel that that makes it unfair.
Mhm.
We're trying to let people express themselves, right? Everybody express themselves. But I feel that for me, I feel like I'm not allowed
Mhm.
because of what people, might say or might feel.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a hurtful feeling. That's called self-sacrificing. And yeah, in a lot of cases, we all have to go through that. Not the same thing, but you do have to be careful, because I do a lot of praise the Lord, but I'm not bringing in religion. It's just my way of expressing, or I might find something. I say, oh my, thank God, but it's just, I'm not trying to persuade you or anything. It's just the way I express myself. Like some people say bad words. I had a Jewish friend and he would, he didn't say a bad word, but he didn't believe in Jesus. He goes, Jesus Christ, but it was just the way he expressed himself, so I mean, yeah, we have to do self-sacrifices sometimes.
Yeah, and I definitely hear you, San Juanita. I think that the concept of political correctness, it has its virtues, right? It has its merits, and it's important that we be sensitive to the experiences of other people. I think that it's also very important that we allow people to express themselves in a way that is genuine to them too. I would never want to censor anybody, and I would never want anybody to feel like they can't fully articulate what they feel, what they think. with that said, it is always important to, preface things, or to say, this is not meant to be taken in a personal attack, as a personal attack. This is my point of view. And it's also just as important to be open and receptive to other people's points of view too. So, having, I think, proper conversation, proper communication can usually make people feel more comfortable with saying what they really think, in a way that is productive. Because in the end, that's kind of what it's about, right? It's about being productive. Um, and religion and spirituality, they can sometimes be confused by people. And if you're trying to express your spirituality, as Miss Lois does, I think it's a beautiful thing. Spirituality is something that we all can appreciate, even if it's not the way that we practice our own spirituality. I think it's when it comes across as being evangelical, right? And trying to force other people into believing what you believe. That's when you may or may not get into trouble. But I hear you,
Yes.
San Juanita, and I think that it's
Let
valuable, that you feel welcome.
me give you an example.
Yeah.
With my friends, I would say, okay, girls, bye. God bless you.
Yeah.
One of them became so offended and said, I don't like it when you say that. So they all decided, say good vibes. Okay, goodbye. Goodbye. I tell them, my
Yeah.
goodness, that's not me. Why am I going to say good vibes?
Yeah.
So
I think
I
that's
always say
unfair.
it when she's not around.
Yeah.
But she said, I don't believe in God. It's a fairy tale of yours, things like that. And I'm like, it's just like, God bless you all, goodbye, Oh no, good vibes. So that's what I say. Good vibes, girls. Anyways, just sharing.
No, yeah, and I think that does, kind of speak to some of the general frustrations that people feel now, right? I think you can call it absurd, because it is absurd to censor another person, or to oppress or take away their right to speak as they feel is, genuine to them, and then turn around and say, well, I'm oppressed, therefore, you can't oppress me. So it has that double standard kind of thing to it. But again, it really comes down to just people being, I think, aware of these things and being able to recognize their own privileges, in certain settings. And so I think that it's commendable that you adjust your behavior as necessary. And I think that that's, a sign of a person that is willing to grow. Um, if only everyone could be like that, I think is what it comes down to. Um, Angie, you had your hand up. Thank you for waiting. Before I move on, I want to give you a chance to share your comments.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, no problem. Wow, I I had something completely different, honestly, but just to kind of piggyback on what San Juanita said earlier about how she has like it's absurd that we can't speak our own opinions without offending people. It's kind of, I mean, I have to believe that that's absurd too. Like it kind of just feels like the freedom of speech is now officially starting to become a little bit more limited because people just take on offense to it, and I think that's absurd. Um, so yeah, I do have to agree with San Juanita on that. Also, I do this actually kind of ties back to our last series of a decent living, of how I think it's absurd that a lot statistically now there's a lot more people having to work 2 to 3 jobs in order to just make it like ends meet. And not even that, like these people are also, me including, like my mom and I, we both work a couple of different jobs and we live together and we're still like getting by. And it's just crazy um how everything, especially nowadays over here in California, is so expensive, when it's kind of like, not to put like not to, I don't want to bring politics in, but we're supposed to be this blue state and have all these resources and all that stuff, but it's kind of like, it's absurd that we there's just so much, it's everything nowadays is just expensive. But
Mhm.
that's just kind of my own thought. Sorry. Thanks, guys.
No, and I think those are exactly the reasons why Dadaism kind of flourished, because of the same thing. There was very, like, wide gaps in income inequality. There were more people who were poor who, by today's standards, than there were people who were, rich. And if you look at it, 100 years later, here we are ultimately fighting the same fights. Before I give Abraham a chance to comment, I also want to acknowledge the chat. And in the chat, we have Abraham wrote, monkeys. A monkey doesn't like other monkeys that he or she doesn't know. Also, he wrote, socially, we are all bound to think of others before we act. Yet we also have to express our ideas. So, right, there's like a kind of like a dichotomy there, or a paradox. Mojde also wrote, probably becoming offended. It is not equally, it does not mean that we are equally being right. I think I got that right. And then Julie added, religious thoughts and ideas can be important ways to understand complex philosophical notions. When you try to dictate your views, it sometimes becomes a problem, right? Just like I said, about coming across as evangelical, that can be a problem. And Abraham says, as a piece of advice, I guess, you can always say you didn't say which God it was that you were sending blessings. So that's always a solution. Abraham, you want to add a couple more things?
Yeah, just to piggyback on Angie's comment, as you can see in the poster here, that's a lot of reflection of the times. You can see a lot of industrialization, which is kind of the switch from rural stuff to more industrial, going to the cities, all that work that's being manifesting in the culture, right? And also the economics, like you were saying, they were making fun of the bourgeois, like basically what's art, right? Do it have to be in a museum to become this expensive piece of art that belongs in a museum? Let's put a toilet there. But since it's in the museum, now it's art, right? So it's that kind of reflection of the times. So it's good that you have that connection, even though this has been a long time since this happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I tried to zoom in there a little bit so that we could see some of the smaller details there. But Abraham is right. In this particular collage, there's a lot of elements of industrialization, which is, one of the reasons why capitalism became such a strong force economic structure in Europe, in Western Europe especially, and in the United States. Angie, have something else to add?
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just gonna kind of piggyback back on whatever Abraham just said, but it's kind of like, yeah, history is repeating itself, and it's wild.
It is.
History definitely.
Yeah.
And you know what I also think is still absurd?
What's that?
That we still don't know the secret formula to the Krabby Patty from SpongeBob. Good night, you guys.
Yes, which does actually bring us, I think, to our next little exercise right here. So remember, we were talking about the things that are absurd to you, right? What are the modern day things that are absurd? Some of us were able to pull out some examples from the past, which are still alive today, alive and very well, such as like capitalism, the cost of living, the inaccessibility of, proper living wages, that kind of thing. Women's rights were obviously limited. They still continue to be to a certain degree. There's a lot of things that we can point to now that are absurd, things that we all have very strong reactions about. There's also something that is still very common today, or perhaps, just a symptom of what happened 100 years ago. And one of those things is marketing phrases, right? So what I'd like you to do right now is write down 3 different marketing phrases that you hear frequently. And I mean either daily or almost daily. It could be something that you read frequently too. If you see, ads in the newspaper or on billboards, things that you see often that are phrases, I'd like you to write them down. Write down 3 of them, because those are going to be the tools that we use to do the exercise later. And I gave a couple of examples here, igual en español, especialmente para ustedes que son bilingües o que prefieren también escribir en español. es igual. Hay frases mercadotécnicas que existen que son muy reconocidas. In English, I put "do a dollop of daisy." That's one that I hear often. Whether you recognize the brand or not, or whether you recognize where it comes from, that's kind of beside the point. But that was one of the examples that I could think of that I hear on a regular basis. Also, at BK, you can have it your way. You rule. It's another example of one that I hear very often. And then for the people that know, you'll get this one. It's "I'll buy that for $1." That's not exactly one that you might hear very often, but if you know, you know. Y en español aquí les puse uno que a mí me ha llamado la atención muy seguido. Es "un poco de su país." You might recognize the brand that uses that particular catchphrase. And then the one that I remember from when I was a little boy, "sola no, con mazola." Y luego, uno de los más nuevos es "móntate una vida mejor." And this one actually kind of sounds funny, but this last one actually, believe it or not, comes from Spanish marketing, Spanish language marketing for IKEA. "Móntate una vida mejor." So take a quick second here, write down 3 different marketing things that are phrases that you can remember off the top of your head. You can add them to the chat too if you want.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, should we put them in the chat?
Yeah, you can put them in the chat or you can write them down on your own separate sheet of paper, whichever works for you. As long as you can reference them again later. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm loving it.
Oh, I was about to ask what's the Burger King one, but yeah, you just reminded me. Thank you.
Yeah. That one is at BK, you can have it your way. You rule. Oh, that's a good one. Where's the meat? Or where's the beef? That's a good one. That's a classic. Just do it, of course. I see a couple people. And don't squeeze the Charmin. Yeah. Mad Pizza Monday. Oh, yeah. There you go. Little Caesars. Pizza, pizza. As we used to say when I was little. That's a marketing phrase, Abraham? Put that shit in everything.
Yeah, I think it was a sauce. And it was funny because it was old lady doing it.
That's right. Oh my God, I remember that. And they would bleep the S. I think it was Frank's Red Hot, if I remember right. Yeah. I put that beep on everything. Frank's Red Hot. That's a good one. I'm sure you can come up with at least one, San Juanita. Yeah. Even if it's not something that you hear often, but you read it, like I said, or if
The
you.
only one that I remember, somebody had already written it. I'm loving it.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, that's fine. Like you can obviously use that one.
I'm loving it.
There's nothing that says that we can't share these, right? As part of the exercise. Because again, that speaks to sort of the globalization of capitalism, right? All of us can go to practically any country in the world now, and we can find something that is uniquely American, like McDonald's or Coca-Cola or Gatorade or Nike's. Adidas is a German company, but you can go anywhere in the world and find Adidas, Puma, because of soccer, football. Those are brands that are global brands for a reason. So those things are things that can definitely apply to everyone.
I got a link to all the stations all over the world, all the radio stations.
Uh-huh.
So I started investigating them, and there was like American music everywhere in the world.
Yeah. I have very clear memories of being in taxis in Mexico City when I was little and hearing Michael Jackson and hearing Tina Turner and Creedence Clearwater Revival. So they're definitely globalization, I think, is probably one of the most absurd things that we continue to experience, and we probably never will stop experiencing at this point. But I think we have a good amount. So to continue on, I'd like to share with you another work of art. This one comes from Hugo Ball. Hugo Ball was also one of the founders of Dadaism. Y aquí, como pueden ver, esto es básicamente una completa tontería. This is utter nonsense. This is what would be called a sound poem, and its focus is on just the sound of words. So it's actually much more sophisticated than just simply gibberish. But Hugo Ball was one of the founders of the Dada movement. If I remember correctly, he was also one of the people who actually started the, what was it called? Cafe Voltaire, which is a cafe in Switzerland that was basically the mecca of Dadaism. That's the place where Dada was actually started by all of these different poets, writers, and artists who would come and share their ideas. Yeah, in other words, it was a hipster cafe. And there you go, San Juanita, Ross, dress for less. That's perfect. Yeah. So one of the things that also is really important for us to think of as a tool for Dada, especially for literary Dada work, is the concept of the non sequitur, la incongruencia. Es una frase tal como una respuesta que no coincide lógicamente o que no está claramente relacionada con lo previamente dicho. A non sequitur, the actual definition is a statement, such as a response, that does not follow logically from or is not clearly related to anything previously said. So it's kind of like an interjection. You could think of it as something that is kind of coming straight out of left field. Es algo que nos deja un poco despistado a veces. We don't know where it came from, but it just came, right? And that goes back to the quote that we started off with from Tristan Tzar. The concept of a non sequitur is kind of like the concept of the thought in the mouth, right? It's just something that comes out. It's the first thing that comes to mind. When writers of the period were really trying to develop the idea of the absurd, they had this very philosophical point of view that our minds were wired in such a way that everything that happened as it happened was kind of like a deep representation of who we were as humans. So if you were to follow a train of thought without any kind of logical constructions, without really thinking about your thoughts, that would be something that would be considered true human nature. So the idea of the non sequitur, of la incongruencia, esa idea fue algo que para los dadaístas fue la naturaleza humana pura, right? It was pure human nature. So some examples of non sequiturs that I constructed for us, and I do want to say when I was writing these, I was writing these without putting any thought into them. It was just literally the first ideas that came into my head. Reading them back later, I'm looking at them and I'm saying to myself after creating the handout, they kind of make sense when they go together. But in the moment, I was really literally doing a very stream of consciousness kind of activity. Pero aquí les va. The first one I wrote was robots use jet propulsion. I prefer tacos de asada. The second one I wrote is the mind is more like a river. Staunch witnesses define hearts otherwise. Doesn't have to make sense, but if you stop and think about it a little bit, it might. The third one that I wrote is there is no place like home. Animation is an equestrian dance. Again, a non sequitur really has no logical connection between the phrases, between the words, right? I mean, what in your average sort of thought process, what connection is there between the idea of home and the idea of animation and equestrianism? Like there's no connection, but it's just how my mind was working in the moment. It's just the first thing that popped into my mind. I when I was much younger and was practicing my writing every single day, I would actually do these exercises where I would do stream of consciousness writing. And I would write the very first thing that came to mind as a way to practice the skill of writing in the moment. In some ways, that is what a Dadaist would do. It is the type of writing exercise that helps create things like this sound poem, because you're not really thinking about the phrase. You're not really thinking about whether it's right or wrong in the moment. All of that comes later. The art happens in the editing. And that's something that's really useful to remember, just as a general rule in writing, in creative writing. Pero aquí las incongruencias nos ayudan a formar ideas distintas. The juxtaposition of ideas, thanks to non sequiturs, is very useful for all of us as writers. So it's something to keep in mind. Ooh, thank you, Julie, for adding a few. Tonight at dawn leaves us empty. Nice, nice. Hot loves me at noon tomorrow. Tomato eats my dog in the garden. I love the absurd. You know, they're great images, right? They're very concrete. I can see the tomato, I can see it eating a dog in the garden. What was the drug of choice during the Dada period? That is a very good question, Abraham, and I suspect that it had a lot to do with opium.
Read that.
Does anyone have any questions about the non sequitur, the concept of the non sequitur? All right. So we're going to practice this a little bit. So what I would like you to do is take those phrases. Was it before marijuana? Marijuana was probably one of the tools that they used as well. But truth be told, and this is my own personal thing, so please no one take offense to this, but I think if you require substances to alter your mind state in order to be creative, then I have a suspicion that the creativity might be, or that the drug might be kind of a handicap. Because these are things that we can accomplish with no high whatsoever. Again, that's my own personal view on this, but you know that doesn't mean that that it's not a tool for some people. But again, you know, to do it without the tool, I want us to practice this. So interject the first word or phrase that comes to mind between your set of marketing phrases. Don't allow yourself to think about it. Just do it. So take a minute using the handful of phrases that you wrote either in the chat or on your sheet of paper somewhere. Just read them off and write the first thing that comes to mind right after you finish reading that. No thought, just the first words that come to mind. Y para ustedes que prefieren escucharlo en español, les exijo que interponen la primera palabra o frase que viene en mente entre su set de frases mercadotécnicas. No se deje pensarlo tanto, solo hágalo. Como dice Nike, just do it. Éntrale. Con confianza. Síguele, San Juanita, síguele. Sigue la corriente.
So I keep writing?
Go for it, yeah.
Oh, okay.
First things that come to mind. Aprovecha.
Are we going to read these back?
Yeah, if
Okay.
you like.
This is crazy.
That's the idea. I'll give you all another 2 minutes. No thought, no pause. Just keep going. First thing that comes to mind. First word you see, first word you hear. Just let it come. Let the thought be produced through the pen or pencil. Final minute. You want to add it to the chat, you're more than welcome to add it to the chat. Let the marketing phrases inspire their magic. And then go ahead and finish the line, finish the thought. I'm going to stop sharing here for the moment. there's anyone that would like to share, you're more than welcome to share now.
Okay, I will if you don't mind, because I have to go off early for tonight.
All right, go ahead, Miss Lois.
Okay, it says, and this is crazy. I enjoy life. Daybreak early. Bark like a dog. Woof woof. Tin can ugly. Oh, ugly. Shut up. Crazy, crazy world. Not me going forward. Life can be hard. Keep still. Okay, I'm turning the page here. Spit it out. Stupid, stupid. Get out. Mess up. Go pray somewhere. And that's it.
Oh, thank you, Miss Lois.
That's crazy.
I can definitely get the sense of it being a true stream of consciousness. The first things that were coming to mind, it sounds like they definitely manifested on your page, which was the point. So great job. I think we could share maybe one more, if there's one more person that would like to share.
I can share.
All right. Juanita, whenever you're ready.
It's nonsense, but it's nonsense. So I started, of course, with the phrase, draws dress for less. Even if love hurts your eyes, running down the street is my thing. Windows seem cold and unclean. Perhaps it is the mental issues afflicting me. The river flows slow. Mornings seem terrible for old people. Just give away your shoes and dresses, and my music will lead you to me. That's what I wrote. I don't know if it makes any sense. I don't think it does, but okay.
Yeah, that's great. I think, one of the things to remember about Dadaist writing is that writing that takes this approach of the non sequitur, of the first thing that comes to mind. It was something that was developed more and then used in other forms of art, in other forms of writing. So, especially if we look at like psychoanalytic theory, the work of Sigmund Freud and his contemporaries, they would look at something like that and they would say, these are things or thoughts, messages that are coming through from the subconscious. They have a place. They have a purpose for being on the page. And if you're practicing it in that way, it could potentially be, therapeutic in its own way. So it makes complete sense if you look at it from that perspective. So don't discount these things that you wrote as nonsense. They're not complete nonsense. They might come across like it, but they're actually saying something that's much, much deeper than what it appears to say. So keep that in mind. Yeah, and it looks like Abraham did do the research. So, with that in mind, let's go back to our handout. I do want to make sure that we give ourselves enough time to finish the lesson here, to hopefully set you up for your homework. So I have a poem here that I would like to share. And, I'd be more than happy to have somebody help interpret it. This is one of my own personal poems, and this was actually one of the very first poems that was published by me many, many years ago. I'm talking about like 2005 or something like that. So this is definitely one of my older poems. And I do have to tell you that it was in fact inspired by an actual Jesus Christ action figure that I found. So it has an actual like legitimate what's it called? Real world inspiration point. But do I have a volunteer? Do I have somebody that might want to give it a shot and read it for us? Ya sea en inglés o en español. No?
I can read whichever one you want me to read.
Okay. Well, I'll let you
Español.
pick the first choice. Yeah, whichever one you want.
Habla español.
Órale.
Me gusta leer español.
Va. Whenever you're ready, then.
Okay, leo ya. ¿Ya? Ok. El completamente nuevo muñeco de acción de Jesucristo. de Luis Antonio Pichardo. Y hoy, presentando el completamente nuevo muñeco de acción de Jesucristo, ya con su gestión Kung Fu y acción de latigazo poderoso, capaz de hacer correr a cualquier comerciante de la ira del Todopoderoso. Aprovecha ya y recibirás tu propio gato de 9 colas de complemento, ideal para revivir aquellas maravillosas memorias de la película La Pasión, también disponible, se vende aparte. Y por el bajo precio de solo $9.99 por mes, por 9 meses. Pero espera, hay más. También te mandaremos de complemento absolutamente gratis un bellamente elaborada a mano andrógino muñeco de Satanás, sin costo extra a ti. Recuerda, Jesucristo no solo es mi homeboy, además es mi muñeco de acción. It's cute.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you,
Le
Samani.
mando a Satanás free of charge.
Yeah. Do I have a volunteer who would like to read it with their best made-for-TV commercial voice in English?
I'll try it.
All right. Go ahead, Miss
Okay.
Lois.
So where do I start? And now?
Yeah. The all-new Jesus action figure.
And now, introducing all the new Jesus action figure. Now with Kung Fu grip and mighty whip action. Able to make any merchant run from the, almighty wrath. Act now and receive your very own cat of nine tails accessories. Ideal for relieving those wonderful memories from the Passion movie. Oh boy, this is crazy. Also available sold separately. And for a low, low price of only $9.99 a month for 9 months. But wait, there's more. We'll also throw in a complimentary, absolutely free, beautifully handicrafted, what is that? And glorious.
Androgynous.
Yeah, that's what it is. Satan doll at no extra charge to you. Remember, Jesus is only my homeboy. He's also my action figure. Lord, forgive us in the name of Jesus.
Excellent job. Thank you so
That's
much.
crazy. When I've read that before, I says, no, we can't be going playing with Jesus like that. But you have some people out there, and there's some people behind the pulpit do almost the same doggone thing. And people have fallen away from the church because of that rigmarole, that ring-a-matane. And that's so he knows that we don't mean any harm.
Yeah. And I think that, that not to get overly religious with people, but, speaking from a spirituality standpoint, I think you're right, Ms. Lois, whichever God figure you worship, I think that they would understand that these are, human constructions, right? And I kid you not, this poem, when I wrote it, it was literally inspired by a Jesus action figure that I found at a store.
Well, I believe truthfully that if the younger people who have not grasped the true righteous understanding, sometimes they need to hear something like this with an explanation to kind of like, how you sift flour, chip the lumps and make it all smooth, to help give them an understanding because they're lost. And we need to do something to help them, So we don't just want to plant a seed and always leave somebody else to water it, but, have a little water there where you can kind of help them along.
Yeah.
And I think about my great-grand and great-great-grand, so yeah, it's important. It's important.
Yeah. So I don't think that we need to analyze the poem that much today, but one question that I have for everyone is, did you take this poem serious? Did you read this or hear this and say, wow, like that is real? That is something that I want to buy. Did you take it serious as a as like a marketing tool?
Mm-mm.
No, right?
Not I.
I did not take it seriously. It would seem like a gag.
A mockery.
Right. And that's exactly what satire does. Satire, the satirical tone of it, it just takes something that is already absurd and just amplifies it that much more, right? That was the point of this poem. It was taking something that I saw as absurd, and it used some of the tools of modern day society, specifically capitalism and the tools of capitalism, to just really amp up that absurdity, make it that much more ridiculous to hear, that much more ridiculous to see. The simple fact that something like a person's spiritual or religious practice can be commodified and turned into an action figure that is sold at a profit, to me, that was ridiculous. That was absolutely absurd. So, how can I comment on that without being, I don't know, pedantic, without talking down to people? Well, the way that I felt I could do that was by making fun of it, by using its own tools against it, right? If we're going to use something like, war as a way of like something that is absurd, right? What can we do to make something that is so serious come across as a message that will critique it and potentially inspire reflection? Well, satire for the Dadaists was one of the tools, and that could be one of the tools that you use as well. Think of all the times in history where we've had either films or plays or poems or, even music that makes fun of the concept of war and is still anti-war, that still inspires people to protest against war. Um, there's I think a challenge in turning something into a commercial venture, right? If you want to make money off of it, you're kind of in your own way undercutting it, but it doesn't mean that you can't still have a message of positive change. Going back to one of the marketing phrases that I wrote, I'll buy that for $1. Did anybody recognize it? No. That came from the movie RoboCop, the original RoboCop. For anybody who's watched that movie in particular, the original RoboCop is a complete satire about urban decay and the militarization of the police force. If you've seen the movie, you'll kind of understand. But it uses satire, especially in the way that it makes fun of the automobile industry, the way that it makes fun of game shows of the 80s, and in the way that it makes fun of just capitalism as a whole. By having that recurring commercial that they show in the movie with the weird kind of old white guy saying, I'll buy that for $1 in very inappropriate situations, that is a way of commenting on just how ridiculous capitalism is and what it can do to communities and what it has done to a community such as Detroit in the case of the movie. Here in this poem, I'm using the same tools of capitalism as a way to make fun of capitalism, to point out how just bad of an idea it is to commodify a person's spiritual practice. I think that it's wrong, and I think that it is something that we could probably all stand by, right? We all want to respect each other. So, let's first call out the things that are disrespectful. So all of that is to say, reflecting on what we talked about today, right? Reflecting on the tools of Dadaism, I would really encourage you all to spend the next few days as you do your homework using Dadaist techniques, specifically satire and the critiquing of sociopolitics, sociopolitical politics or policies, And try to use the idea of the absurd and the non sequitur as a way to write a poem that is Dadaist, a Dada-inspired poem, as you see here, right? Reflect on the feelings of frustration that we all feel with social, political policies. Reflect on the things that make you feel frustrated with our government, with our, lives, our everyday lives. Think about the way in which we're often displaced or treated as something that is a commodity, something that can just be used and then thrown away. All of us, I'm almost 100% sure, have had that experience before, especially those of us that are working, your typical 9 to 5 job, or who have worked one in the past. You know, there's a lot of things that we can comment on in contemporary society, whether it's at the local scale or on the global scale. But this week, that is your homework. That is your assignment, should you choose to accept it. Um, Write a Dada-inspired poem that capitalizes on some of the techniques that we looked at today. So, does anyone have any questions or any other additional comments that they would like to add for today? Well, if there are no other questions, then we'll leave it at that. I'll also be launching a quick little questionnaire here. So please do take a couple of minutes here to quickly fill in the short questionnaire. There's a total of 7 questions. The first 4 are to basically help, figure out what worked for today, what I can do to improve. And the last 3 are optional questions. But thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight, especially on this Halloween. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a good time. I hope that
Thank
you
you.
also are inspired to make fun of the things that are absolutely ridiculous about our world. You can make a change. You can inspire change through your poetry using some of these techniques. Um, so I definitely encourage you to consider that as you're working through the editing process of your poetry. But first and foremost, just go for it. Don't put too much thought into what you write when you first start writing it, because you know to really truly be a Dadaist, just let that stream of consciousness flow. Let your subconscious really speak for you, because it's probably the thing that needs to come out the most. So thanks again, everyone. For those who are joining in on the live stream, I'm going to end our live stream now. Of course, this recording will go up on our YouTube channel in the next day or so, and it will be posted along with the handout in our Google class for those of you who are fully enrolled. And for those, again, who are fully enrolled in the program, next week we'll be workshopping your writing that you completed today, or this week, I should say. So
Thank you.
yeah. So thank you again, everybody. And I hope you all have a good night.